Good evening. Welcome to White Collar Week. This is our Tuesday night speaker series where we have interesting speakers from all sectors of criminal justice join us as our guests. Our guest speaker tonight is Jason Bowles, a noted criminal defense attorney in New Mexico and Texas. He's also known recently as the criminal defense attorney for Hanna Gutierrez, who is the armorer in the Rust movie case. So got a lot of headlines about that one. So Jason's going to tell us all about that, and I'll introduce him a little more in a few minutes. So I have some announcements to make before we get started. The first is this is sponsored by our White Collar Support Group, and we meet on Monday nights on Zoom. It's open to anybody who has been directly justice impacted. If you want information about it, go to our website. That's prisonist.org. That's prisonist like this. And you'll get information. We recently had our 400th meeting, so we've been doing this over 8 years now. And we hope you will join us either if you're live here tonight or you are out there in Zoom land. We hope you'll join us on a Monday night or spread the word to your friends and family and colleagues and clients. We are also sponsored by Brent Cassidy's podcast, Nightmare Success, In and Out. And since Brent is a guest here tonight, listening in, I want to make sure I didn't mess that one up. So thank you, Brent, for your sponsorship. We have a few guests lined up over the next few months. I'm just going to rattle them off fast so you know who's coming. On April 16th, we have former governor of New Jersey, Jim McGreevey, is going to be our guest speaker. Very excited about that. Jim has a super interesting story, which all of you probably know something about, but he's going to fill us in on what it's like to have risen to the level of being a governor of a state in this country, and then kind of crashed and burned, and now how he's rebuilding his life through service. And he's currently running to be mayor of Jersey City, New Jersey. So we're going to hear all about that from Governor McGreevey. On May 14th, we have Michelle Weinstadt Miller, and she is one of us as well. And she has a new book that's recently come out, a novel called The Lower Power. That's her 4th novel. And hopefully we're going to get her to read some excerpts of the book and talk to her about how she managed to get through her journey of being in the streets and drug addiction and losing her law license and getting it back, and now being the general counsel of the Fortune Society, which is the largest criminal justice nonprofit in New York. So super interesting story there too. On June 4th, we have Tara Simmons. Tara is a Washington state representative, formerly incarcerated herself, and a lawyer. And she has a story of how she and some of her colleagues managed to get the Washington State Bar overturned and get herself admitted to the bar in Washington. So another great story. And just in on July 9th, we have Sabrina Morgan. And Sabrina is a member of this group, and she helped us out when we did our Start Here video, which hopefully you've all seen. If not, you can find it on our website, prisonist.org. And Sabrina did the interviewing for us, and she's got a story that cannot be missed. So more about that in the months to come. So, but tonight we have Jason Bowles. Jason is a buddy of mine. We worked together on a case in Albuquerque. And I'm just going to read a little of his bio. Jason is the criminal defense attorney in Albuquerque, New Mexico, who represented Hanna Gutierrez, the armorer in the Rust movie case. He has been lead counsel in over 75 trials in federal, state, and military courts, both criminal and civil. Most recently, he tried a medical malpractice case in state court in New Mexico and achieved a multi-million-dollar verdict for his client. He's also handled over 40 appeals in state and federal courts in New Mexico, Texas, and the District of Columbia. He spent 5 years as a federal prosecutor and worked on complex fraud, smuggling, and tax cases. And he's now been a private defense counsel for over 20 years. Jason has a tremendous reputation. I can tell you that. I walked through the U.S. Attorney's office with Jason, and while we were on our way to a meeting, and people literally came out of their offices to shake his hand and say hi to him. So I think when you're trying to resolve a case, it helps to be well liked, and Jason is certainly that. So without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Jason, who's going to speak for a half hour or so. Then we'll go to Q&A after that. Again, if you want to ask any questions or share your experience, put your name in chat after Jason leads, and we'll call on you. So Jason, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Jeff, thank you very much, and I really appreciate it. And I want to thank everybody for having me on. As Jeff said, we met on a case in Albuquerque, and really enjoyed it, and our friendship and everything, and this opportunity to be on and talk. And Jeff, so thank you for that. I hope the connectivity is good. I am in Panama. I told Jeff, and so I'll show you real quick. That's the ocean and trees and that way, and my family's out enjoying that. So and this is the little guy that we're here visiting. That's my middle son's kid. So that's why I'm in Central America. Otherwise, I'd be doing this from Albuquerque, and that's where I got my start in the practice of law. It was actually in Las Cruces. So I started as a law clerk for a federal judge. I was in the 10th Circuit, and his name was Judge Baldock. And I did that for 2 years. And then I wanted to go to the FBI. At that time, I didn't get accepted. So the judge helped me get into the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of New Mexico. So my first 5 years I spent, as Jeff said, prosecuting immigration on the border, narcotics crimes, and then I got into violent crime, murders, sexual assaults, and drug type cases. After about 5 years, I left the U.S. Attorney's Office, and it was primarily because my heart wasn't in it after 5 years. I got some very good experience, but I felt like in a lot of cases, justice isn't done for individuals. And I felt like my role and what I wanted to do was really helping individuals. So at that time, I left and started in private practice. I started for a firm. And then I went in eventually in my own firm. So in the course of that, I have over the past about 20 years and getting ready for this Russ case, which was truly one of the most challenging cases in my career. I've tried significant white collar fraud cases, tax cases. We've had cases in Texas regarding Bitcoin recently, and a wire fraud and mail fraud type scheme that the Northern District of Texas ended up dismissing once we got all the facts together. And so it's been a wide variety of white collar, and I do understand that area. I have been working with the guidelines since I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office, sentencing aspects of that, so I understand that aspect as well. I started off when in the practice when the guidelines were mandatory. So now we have a lot more flexibility in sentencing and that kind of thing. So that part of my practice leading up to the defense was a lot of trial work. And that's where I got a lot of the experience I had that I brought to bear later. The other thing it did, though, was it was a lot of intensity and stress. And one lady I heard when I was going to come on was going to be on for her son and get into criminal defense. And I just wanted to touch on something because it's part of my background. Not only did I get great experience, I also ended up seeing a lot of things, murder, pictures, video, talking to victims, sexual assault, the same thing, talking to victims, working with young kids, 4 years old, 5 years old that had been assaulted. And over time, that affected me. And so what happened is I developed a problem with alcohol. And that problem led to around 2016, I had a very serious problem. By the grace of God and by help with my family and friends, I got into a program. I got through it and I came out on the other side of it. And thank God I've been good since then. But I say that because it is a tough gig. And when you have a heart and you want to help people like a lot of us do, it's a tough go. One of the things that I learned as part of that process was you do have to care, and I do care. You do have to understand who you're helping, and it's about them. It's not about you. It's not about winning. I won a lot of cases over the years in the U.S. Attorney's Office. I won a lot of trials, and I started thinking, even drinking, I could win, and I was winning a lot of trials, even doing that. And the thing that program and that moment in my life, which was the lowest and was rock bottom, became a huge strength for me because it taught me humility again, and it taught me getting through something by the grace of God and your family and friends. And also it taught me that the focus is on your client and that person who's going through the worst time of their life and who's trying to get through some of the most nerve-wracking, anxiety-ridden parts they're ever going to be. And so you have to be there for them. You have to be there for them and be present. And that's one thing I was missing. So I tell you that because I wanted to give a little bit of background about, even though I've had a lot of accomplishments as in the military, I tried court martials, I tried some of the biggest cases in New Mexico to date. The treasurer was charged in 2006. That was an 8-week trial, 2 trials split into 8 weeks. I tried a corruption case at the courthouse. But the biggest accomplishment I think I've had is going through that period and realizing what we really do as lawyers. And that is, it's an honor and it's a privilege to help another person who's going through that period of their life. So with that in mind, I got a call early November of 2021 from a friend of mine. She's a civil attorney, and she said, "Hey, I've got a pretty interesting case for you. You may be interested. It involves Alec Baldwin." So I get the message, and I think, well, hell, I better call her back on this one, see what this is about. So I called her back, and I had seen a little bit of news coverage and realized, wow, this is the shooting on the movie set I had just read about, and she wants me to represent the armorer who she was helping civilly. So I said, absolutely, I'd be happy to talk to her. And so that started the process. When I talked to Hannah, I told her my background and said I'd be happy to meet you. We flew out to Las Vegas, and I said this is the most challenging case of my career. It started right away as the most challenging because immediately the prosecution was employing the press. It's not something I had dealt with up until that point that intensely, but it's something I had to get quickly up to speed on with regard to ethical rules and what could be said, with regard to if they are attacking my client and if they are commenting on her guilt, what can I say? So one of the first things that happened is NBC and ABC wanted us to go on the Today Show and Good Morning America. So I decided in consultation with Hannah that we were going to do that November 2nd, approximately. We went on both of those shows, and one of the things that you really have to be careful about when you do that is you don't know everything. You don't know the discovery. You don't know what all is going to come out. So I tried to be general, but in the very beginning of this case, in starting it, we injected an issue which was going to play. It played out through the entire process of the case through the trial, and that was, we felt early on in talking with Hannah's dad, who had been an armorer in Hollywood for 50 plus years. His name's Del Reed. He had worked on Tombstone. He had worked on other movies, helped Brad Pitt, Denzel Washington, Sharon Stone learn to shoot. He said, in 50 years of doing armor business, I've never seen a live round like this appear on set, let alone 6 live rounds that appeared in a 50-round dummy box. So his assessment immediately was that this had to be sabotage. So from the get-go, what we did with the media was tell them this cannot be an accident. This has got to be somebody that wanted to set somebody up on that set. So we did that. That then created a relative firestorm for quite some time, with the prosecution trying to disprove that idea, while in the meantime attacking Hannah and her guilt in the media. So that went on for months and months and months of that kind of media intense coverage, which created a real problem for us. So again, we had to go back and we had to create a media strategy, and we had to work out the kind of issues we were going to hit on, which we did. We changed a bit, but we eventually learned that another individual on that set, who was the prop master, she was Hannah's boss right over. She had thrown rounds away right after the shooting. So we started putting that in our motions and our pleadings that was going to get to the press. There was no explanation for it. Right after the shooting, the prop master, this person, called the main supplier to the set, and that was PDQ Props. They had a conversation, which we didn't have, but right after that, she threw away rounds. So that was significant. We then, in the course of our investigation, learned that 5 days before the shooting, Sarah Zachary, who was the prop master, and the individual I'm talking about who had supplied, had conversations where they wanted my client Hanna fired. And that was over a negligent discharge which had occurred on set. So at this point, we're thinking we've got a situation where this may not have been negligent. This may have been a situation where somebody wanted her fired. Well, another huge challenge that happened, because we were asking the district attorney and the sheriff's office to investigate, is they refused to do it. They didn't believe this idea. They focused solely on Hanna. And they believed Hanna had not done her job. Hanna, as armor, had not inspected, had not shaken the rounds as she should have. And so those live rounds were the responsibility of Hanna. There was then a slight focus as part of that on Mr. Baldwin, because he had gone on the media and he had said that he did not pull the trigger on that Colt. Now, subsequent to him making that statement, the expert for the government and the FBI had both determined that Colt 1873 cannot be fired without pulling the trigger or without your finger depressing the trigger as you pull back that hammer. So, and I had been talking to Baldwin's attorneys. In fact, Baldwin called our office one day and wanted to speak to me. And before I could tell his assistant I can't talk to him without his attorney, he pops on the phone. And the only thing, in trying to tell him, I got to get your attorney on the phone, got to get your attorney on the phone, the only thing that was going through my head was, this guy sounds just like he does on Saturday Night Live. And so I don't remember literally anything he said after that, but I did tell him, we got to get your attorney on the phone. But what we learned in that process is the district attorney and the sheriff had two people, and they weren't going to vary. They weren't going to waver. They weren't going to change their investigation. They weren't going to go out and beyond that. They wanted to get Alec Baldwin because he's such a high-profile A-list actor, and Hanna Gutierrez Reed because she was the easy target in the armor. That's my assessment as her attorney. Other people have other views of it. But when it came down to Mr. Baldwin, they believed that when he did the cross draw, which is a draw that you pull a weapon across your, literally a cross draw, and you pull it across, and what happens is if you have your finger in the trigger and you don't hold that hammer well enough, and you're supposed to hold it with the middle of your thumb, but if you hold it on the tip, that can slip off. So what they had believed, and what I think the experts believe he did, Mr. Baldwin, was he had the trigger depressed, because we had video showing that before lunch, and that hammer slipped off his thumb, and that's what caused the firing. What was also really hard to understand for me and highly unusual was that another individual had come between Hanna, my client, and Baldwin. And his name was David Halls. David Halls was the first assistant director on the movie set and was in charge of safety. There's no doubt about it. He admitted that. He's in charge of safety. And Hanna, when she had checked the firearm and she had loaded the dummy rounds, which she believed were all dummy, She had given that firearm to David Halls. David Halls said he was going to sit in the church with it and literally sit in with the firearm. And then Hanna said to him, if you need me, if Baldwin's going to use that firearm, please call me back in the church. So she left the church to go do prop duties, which the district attorney very much criticized. But at that time, the production and throughout the production, they had split Hanna into two roles, which was she was part-time props and part-time armor, which every expert, by the way, that came on the stand said on a gun-heavy set like this, you cannot have a part-time armor. You just can't do it. In fact, you should have had two armors. Hanna was a part-time prop, part-time armor. She left the gun with David Halls. David Halls, without telling anybody Baldwin was going to use the firearm, hands the firearm to Mr. Baldwin. They're doing what's in the movie industry called blocking. They're not even rehearsing at that point. They're not filming. So during that blocking scene, Miss Hutchins has got the camera. Joel Souza is behind her, and they're trying to get the shot of him pulling the weapon out of his holster. Now, that's all that was in the script. It wasn't supposed to be pointed. It was supposed to be just a shot showing him pull it out of his holster. For whatever reason, at that point, Mr. Baldwin pointed the weapon, pointed it towards the camera. We don't know exactly, but it appears his thumb slipped off the hammer, and that's when it fired. Now, no one on set, and there was no proof in the trial, knew there was a live round on set, let alone six. That includes Mr. Baldwin. So the question became, on an involuntary manslaughter, was that a reckless act by Hanna Gutierrez Reed? Was it a reckless act by Mr. Baldwin, whose trial is going to be in July? For my client, Hanna Gutierrez Reed, the two reckless acts the government sought out to prove were that she loaded a live round into a firearm that should have only been inert rounds, dummy rounds. And the second act was that she negligently failed to inspect those rounds and the firearm before she handed it off to David Halls. The problem I had with that was that it came down to the way the jury instructions were fashioned. And it always is in these cases on the intent. This was, in my estimation, what I always believed was at most a negligent act, and it was a civil case, but it didn't rise to the level of a criminal recklessness, which you have to show by a willful intent. You have to show what in the law in New Mexico says a conscious disregard for a known risk. So that language was not included in the jury instruction, which we objected to. What was included were those two acts. Either one of them the jury could have found, and that was willful. So that's what went to the jury. I can't get into it, but incidentally, I had a juror reach out to me a few days ago, and that was a big issue with regard to the jury instructions and whether they were complicated and whether they were understandable. So that's going to be a part of our appeal. But based on that jury instruction, based on the fact that they asserted the prosecution, she didn't check that weapon well enough, and that she loaded with the live round, the jury found Hanna guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Now, at the same time, during that trial, she was charged with tampering with evidence on a witness that the prosecution produced 2 years later that said Hanna had handed her off a baggie containing a white powder. The witness grabbed the baggie, white powder, in the hotel room where Hanna was after the shooting. This was 3 or 4 hours after the shooting. She was consoling Hanna. Hanna handed her the bag of white powder. The witness then goes down the hall and throws it in the trash can. She then comes forward 2 years later to say she felt like it was cocaine because 30 years before she had done cocaine when she was a young woman. Well, they charged Hanna with tampering, and my comment to the jury was basically there's no testing, we don't have the drugs, We have no clue what could have been in that bag. And that's not, you can't convict somebody in this country on supposition, on guess, work, on no testing. So one of the things the juror did tell me is they threw that out in 5 minutes. They didn't even really consider it. But the problem I had with that was that the prosecution used that to just taint the best they could the case and the trial. At the same time, the prosecution charged Hanna, and this is in a separate case, it's still pending, with taking a firearm into a bar. Now, this was not during Rust. It was months before when she had a stalker and she was trying to protect herself in Santa Fe. She's going to check it out for the upcoming Rust movie. So she's charged with taking a firearm into the bar. Completely separate from the Rust case. Again, they don't have the firearm. They don't have any proof except a video off of Hannah's phone they're going to try to show with no context, with anything about it. So the comment the prosecutor made to me was she wanted to ensure Hanna got some kind of felony. So that, I tell you all of that to go back to the point that I told you when I said I left the U.S. Attorney's Office. I felt like people were not getting justice individually in a lot of cases I was seeing. I firmly and wholeheartedly believe that in this case. And I believe on comments the prosecutors made about my client, comments the prosecutors made about Mr. Baldwin. And these were reported in the press. She was quoted to say she recharged Mr. Baldwin because it was going to be a teaching moment for him and a lesson in humility, or words to that effect. But it's on the internet. You can Google it. So what this prosecutor, who's actually a special prosecutor, in my opinion, has done is taken on this power and decided because of the high profile nature or whatever it is, she's going to wind up her career in this, getting a couple skins on the wall of a young armorer who was an easy target and a high profile A-list actor who would be kind of the pinnacle of the career. That's my take on why she's doing this. There's another aspect to that we are going to end up appealing, which is the idea of the special prosecutor and her authority. This was the third or fourth prosecutor in this case. This case began with the Santa Fe DA, who then brought in a special prosecutor who was running for Republican office in New Mexico, a state senate or state rep. That person had texted the DA, "Can you announce that I'm on this case? Because it's going to help my candidacy." So both Baldwin's attorneys and us used that in motion practice to basically say, this is completely improper, total conflict. It's very prejudicial. She just wants to use this as a stepping stone for a political career. We also found a motion that she has a conflict of separation of powers because she won her legislative race and she's trying to be a legislator and a prosecutor at the same time, which the New Mexico Constitution doesn't allow split roles in government, somebody to serve more than one branch of government. So she gets out. The DA then tries to take it over herself. That didn't work. So then she brings in this prosecutor who I told you about, who's the third or fourth one in line, who's actually proven to be the absolute worst of all of them, in my opinion. And it's pretty shocking. But that trial was made very tough by that, was made very tough by what I felt like was unethical behavior on the prosecution's part that's persisted throughout with the media. And one aspect of the media I will say was quite difficult was dealing with court TV every day in trial. I've never had to do that. The idea that they're watching everything, my wife's telling me the comments and what tie you're wearing, if you're, touching your head or whatever you're doing. So that was something I had to really kind of focus and just not even think about and just try the case like it was any other case. But that was kind of a circus for a while. But that's a kind of a long-winded way to say this has been the pinnacle of my career in terms of trying to help somebody, in terms of helping somebody that I think was targeted, that I think is a true scapegoat, that she didn't have any resources. And I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back or anything, but we've done this pro bono for 2 years. And we did it because we wanted to, all the experts work pro bono. Everybody I reached out to that would, they said, we'll help her without pay. So we're all doing this because we truly believe in her innocence under the legal standards for involuntary manslaughter. So we're still fighting it. We're now going to go to sentencing. She is looking at 18 months. The judge, there's no mandatory time. So the judge can give her anywhere from 0. She's already been in for about a month, but time served to up to 18 months. And then we will be appealing on those jury instruction issues. We're going to be appealing on evidentiary issues. The judge didn't let us get in a lot of things. One of the big things was the OSHA report. OSHA had come in and investigated the Rust production set. They had determined all the safety failures were caused by production, not giving Hanna enough time to do her job, splitting her into 2 roles, various other safety failures, not following up on negligent discharges. So they fined production $100,000. While we were allowed to have a witness to talk about that, he couldn't get into all the particulars, couldn't remember, and we couldn't introduce the report. So there's various issues like that we are going to be appealing. But that sentencing is going to take place April 15th. And then the appeal is going to be within 30 days of that. So we're hopeful that something can happen to her, for her in that process. But it has been a long haul, and and I don't know if this lighting is, Jeff, I just noticed this is getting bad. I'm gonna try to turn this light on. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So the sun's going down here, but that's where we're at in the stage of the case. We're about to get the sentencing and then the appeal process. And then Mr. Baldwin's trial is going to be in July. I have been in contact with them. We did file a motion for new trial. The judge recently denied that based on the jury instructions. So that's going to have to be addressed on appeal. And that's sort of the summary. I'm probably forgetting some of it, and I kind of truncated some of the parts, but I wanted to, if people had questions to get into those and talk about it on any aspect of it.
Jason, thank you. That was absolutely spellbinding, just fantastic. I don't know that we've ever had a guest kind of get really in there and let us know what it is to try a case and to overcome the obstacles. And I don't know if anyone watched it on Court TV, but I can't even imagine what it was to be in your shoes, to have that kind of attention. And I have you on my Google alert, so it was going off all day. So it was anyway, we're going to turn it over to questions and comments. Please, everyone, keep your question or your comment to 2 minutes or less. We want to be tidy here. And we're going to start with Bill and then Gordon.
Oh, Mr. Bowles, thank you. I agree with Jeff. I wasn't even looking at the screen. I just had my eyes closed, listening to what you were saying, so I could kind of envision it. I remember reading a lot about it and the difficulties and the different prosecutors. My sense was that by the time they got to the third one, that they were going to do everything they could, because they were embarrassed by the missteps that had happened, in 1 and 2. And I saw you shaking your head, so I think that kind of makes sense. But I was surprised that maybe the judge in the case, and you probably can't speak about it too broadly, but didn't, speak to the prosecution about, trying the case like that in the media and really hurting your client's rights for a fair trial. Is there anything you'd like to share about that?
You know, Bill, you make a really good point, and I think you're right. I think they were very embarrassed, the first couple, because I forgot to mention one of the things they did early on was charge a firearm enhancement that was ex post facto. So it wasn't on the books until after the shooting had happened. So it was literally a fundamental error. And so we got that dismissed, and I think they were very embarrassed. And so I think you're right. The gloves came off, and whatever they were going to do to convict now Hanna and now Mr. Baldwin, I think they were going to try to do. I was too. I was also, and I can't say too much about it, but I was very disappointed. I will say that in the fact that I thought there should have been more reining in of what was happening throughout, and that actually persisted in the trial. So I can't say too much more about it, but it's been a really tough one because of that. Everything he said, I agree with.
Mr. Bowles, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Bill. Up next is Gordon, and we could use some more names in chat, please.
Yeah, I just had a question about how you feel about the American system in general and having to deal with prosecutors that have motivations that are, causing misconduct. I mean, is there any type of what can you do to hold accountability to those prosecutors? Because it doesn't seem like it's possible in this system that we have right now.
Yeah, Gordon, that's a very good point. Very good question. I mean, you know, sometimes, and I've seen it before, you've got a prosecutor, like a special prosecutor with this much power that doesn't really have a boss. And a special prosecutor statute in New Mexico allows for this. They're not subject to the district attorney's office. They're not subject to the voters. So the reality is the only people that can do anything are the judge and then the appeals judges. Now, if it gets too out of hand, some instances, the bar. But the reality is it's a dangerous system when you have a special prosecutor who's got that much power to charge whatever they decide they want to charge against within parameters who. You know, in this instance, the legislature appropriated a special $350,000. They initially asked for $650,000, gave them that money, and said, "Knock yourselves out." And so the special prosecutor then brought charges against Hanna and Mr. Baldwin, hired endless experts. They paid $10,000 to a guy to enlarge photos. And this was one of the points I made to the jury. I mean, my kids do this on their iPhone. And I'm not even kidding. They enlarged and enhanced photos to bring out the primers better. And that was $10,000 of taxpayer money. So it's Gordon, it's a great point, and it scares me with regard to the special prosecutor statute. Ordinarily, in the district attorney's office, you've got the power of the office, and they can rein in an assistant, or they can, vote them out. The voters can vote out the DA. With a special prosecutor, you don't have that. So that's what we dealt with.
Let's see. Thank you, Gordon. Great question. Bob, would you like to share or ask a question? You're on mute.
Unmute.
There you
I
go.
have a couple of things. Number one, what was the jury pool like for this case?
It was different than what we expected it to be. Primarily in Santa Fe, you have retirees, and you have primarily retirees, I will say, that would be on the jury pool. It was a mix of young people, people middle-aged, older people. It was a mix of white collar, blue collar. It was really quite a mix of people. It surprised me.
When you say
Actually.
surprising, do you mean good or bad?
I was happy with it because I normally like to have a good cross section of people. They're gonna be fair. And that's always a good jury to me. So we had that good cross section. We had a good jury.
And what was the judge's mistake, as you alluded to, in terms of the jury charge?
Well, right after the verdict, a case came out of the New Mexico Supreme Court called Taylor, and Taylor came out 9 days later. Taylor said our involved manslaughter instructions, if the judge gives more than one premise and they separate them by the conjunctive and or, and they add another one, it becomes confusing for the jury of which premise they're going to find against the defendant. So in other words, in our case, they said Hanna put a live round into a gun when it should have been a dummy, and or Hanna failed to conduct an adequate safety inspection. So the problem with that, and in our criminal system, you have to have a unanimous verdict. All 12 have to find guilty or not guilty. So here they gave him two propositions, and the special prosecutor said, 6 of you can find this, 6 of you can find that. And if you do, that's 12, she's guilty. So my objection is, Judge, we don't even have unanimity then. We don't have a unanimous verdict. We've got to have that.
Well, theoretically, you win on that.
I sure
Because
hope so.
that's the law almost everywhere at this point on the conjunctive and alternative potentials, whether it be a RICO charge or anything else. You still have to have unanimity on what they have agreed upon.
Yes.
So Jeff
Bob-
mentions to me that perhaps I've had some experience in being considered to be overzealous as a prosecutor and overzealous as a defense attorney, and I've been accused of both. I note that the ABA has now struck the word zealous from the role of attorneys in their most recent rulings or suggestions to attorneys. But sometimes you can be too zealous, as you're indicating the prosecutor is. Is their conduct going to be part of your appeal or not?
It is going to be part of the appeal, and I'm going to have a prosecutorial misconduct claim that I'm going to have to make, including with the closing arguments. There were several misstatements. For example, evidence that absolutely was not correct that were made, and that's going to be part of what we're going to say. Now, I don't normally do that. I am all for a fight. If you want to have a fair fight and both sides get it out. But to me, I think you're right. Sometimes you can be too zealous. And this, to me,
You think it's a fair
line.
fight? You think there's usually a fair fight in the courtroom?
Usually they have way more resources than we do, which was the case here. They had $350,000. They had all these people that were looking into it. We had a small team.
And they had the last word.
They had the last word. They always have the last word. So it makes it tough.
So,
But yeah, in the end, they're going to have to deal with the appeals court that they're looking at it with a fresh eye. So I'm just hoping that that helps.
So Jason, just so you know, Bob was my first boss when I got out of law school, and he was a criminal defense.
Oh, yeah, I can tell he's got a lot of experience. Yeah, tremendous amount.
He was a criminal defense attorney in New York City, and he was a special prosecutor under Maurice Najari. So,
oh wow,
yeah,
okay, wow.
yeah, he was hot stuff.
Yeah, RICO and all kinds of things.
Well, it's unfortunate that we all deal with having been prosecutors and who transitioned to being defense attorneys, that sometimes what we think are the same approaches we had and the same ethical approaches that we had then are viewed with some skepticism when we're defense attorneys.
Mm-hmm. True, that's true. What's really crazy to me about this special prosecutor is she's been a career defense attorney. She's never been a prosecutor. So this was her first case. And it's just crazy to me she didn't have more even-handedness.
Well, some of the worst judges we get are the ones who come out of legal aid and we think, oh, they're going to be fair-minded. And then they decide they have to show us that they're not so fair-minded.
Right, that's true.
The-
I've seen that too.
They have to prove their worth on the bench.
That's true.
Thank you, Bob. Next up is Brent, and we could use some more names, please.
So Jason, I'm curious because this was such a high profile case and, you know, it was one of those that you've got celebrities involved. It's a movie set. Do you think that there would have been anything different if it wasn't all that?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's 100%. Had this not involved Alec Baldwin, I don't know that this ever gets charged.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it probably just, it's a sad thing. It's very tragic what happened, but like the Brandon Lee incident that happened in 1993, he was killed on the Crow. There wasn't the type of media at that time, and it wasn't persistent over social media. We didn't have this Alec Baldwin everyday news. I think that's really drove a lot of it.
Yeah.
And why this got charged is what I think.
So Jason, I have a question. A lot of what we see on TV or a lot of our personal experiences are major market experiences. What happened to New York or LA and here you have a very small market, small media, small everything, but now it's filled up with a lot of national media trying to cover it. But what is it like in a town like Albuquerque with a small U.S. attorney's office and a small bar? Everyone knows each other. I assume your kids are all playing soccer at the
Right.
at the middle school together, and then but you still have to does that help? Does it you get along with one another? Does it make for more collegial kind of a bar, or you're kind of climbing all over each other for clients because there's not that many cases to go around?
No, you know what? It does make for more of a collegial bar. And we're very close. Most of us know each other. Most of us are friends. But the idea of the national media descending on Santa Fe was highly interesting, Jeff, because it's this town of 75,000 people approximately. Right by the courthouse is one restaurant that everybody went to. The little old lady, this super nice lady, really ended up loving her by the end. But she's friends with everybody. The judge comes in, she tells us what the judge is eating. The prosecutors come in, tells us what, so we're all kind of descending. They did keep the jurors out. They sent them to another thing, but it makes for a situation where you kind of have to be friendly. Even if, we were going at it, the prosecutor and I in the courtroom, but it's a different type scenario, Jeff. You're right. It's more collegial. Has to be. Not everybody likes each other, but we kind of had to in that trial.
Let's see. Does anybody else have any other questions they'd like to ask Jason, or experience you'd like to share? Because we're coming on the end of our session now. Anyone?
I did want to ask Mr. Bowles one other question. And that is, we recently had in the town that I live in, it recently made national news, unfortunately, because of a young non-binary individual. She was in a fight with a couple of kids in the high school, and then the next day she died. And I live in Oklahoma, outside of Tulsa, and having the national media in town really kind of wreaked havoc with the people in town, like with the population. And it made things very us them. Did you see anything like that in your experience in Santa Fe?
You know, we were all packed in the kind of close area. Now it was, we didn't really see that kind of a problem, thankfully. There were a couple incidents where the jurors were chased by media and the judge had to stop it. And there was a couple where the media did a couple other things that harassed a couple of people, so we had to deal with that. The judge did, but no, thankfully, and I know that does happen, but it didn't happen in this case. Thankfully, in our trial, they ended up being very respectful after the first couple of days.
Yeah, because we had an awful lot here where they were just trying to catch people for comments, and then it irritated the people who lived in town because they're dealing with a whole circumstance of, you know, which is a tragedy, and then you've got people picking at you to try to get, you know, 10-second sound bites, and it really made things pretty terrible.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. That's terrible.
Jason, are you allowed to, or do you need permission from the court to interview the jurors?
You know, the judge tells them here in New Mexico, usually after every trial, you have the right to talk to or not. You probably seen that. But they reached out to me and the individual wanted to talk to me. So I didn't reach out, but they did want to talk about it. And it was fascinating because of what I thought had happened with the jury instruction. It's very close. And you probably know this tried case. I mean, it's just, that's where it came down to.
So were you able to get affidavits from any of them to be able to present to the court on the unanimity question?
I'm trying. We're going to be meeting again, and I'm going to try. I just, you know, I'm certainly going to respect their privacy, and if they don't want to do it, they don't want to do it. But it was interesting to find out, but I am going to meet with them again. But you're right. If we get affidavits, we'd like to.
Can you go back to the trial court with those affidavits?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that if they don't help us, that'll help us on appeal too, that this was an issue.
Right, you got to get it into the record to be able to use it on appeal.
Absolutely. You have to make that record. You're right. I've got to make that record.
Well, good luck.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Bob. Anybody else? Any other questions? Any last licks from anyone? All right, Jason, thank you so much for making yourself available and for calling in tonight from Panama. So you are our first Central American call-in on our meetings. So grateful to you. Again, you know, having worked with you on a case and becoming friends with you, I can tell you just a great guy and a super lawyer. And I hope you'll join us again.
Jeff, thank you so much. And thank you for having me on. Thank you, everybody. That was a really interesting set of questions and thinking about it again. So that was fun. I really appreciate that.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Again, join us on Monday nights for our White Collar Support Group. If you are directly justice impacted, you can get more information on our website, prisonist.org. And you can also please join us for our guest speakers over the next 3 months. All set up, all there, and registration links are on our website, prisonist.org. Jason Bowles, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. Blessings to everyone. Reach out to one another, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.